Welcome to this third video in the series. If you would like to watch parts 1 and 2, that will give you more context on this whole thing. I will put links for it where I normally put links for things. So, I'm kind of psycho, and I made a list in my notebook. It's got color coding and highlight marks and stuff like that, and it compares the first generation streetcars and the second generation streetcars. I'm going to explain this in better detail later, and unfortunately that might end up in part 4, so stay tuned for that if it drags out that long. But in the meantime, I have come up with 12 elements for use in designing a decent streetcar network. This is very, very, very much just kind of a guideline, sort of. There are no rules that are set in stone that you must follow when building a streetcar line, but here are 12 elements that I think make a good one. Number 1, no more circulators. Okay, so you can probably thank Portland for this, because when the system first opened in 2001, it was a circulator in downtown. But unfortunately, it kind of had to be. Portland is almost ridiculously one-way gridded in downtown, and the streetcar tracks are on one-way streets. So there wasn't really much we could do here. And since then, a lot of other cities have copied that design. But I would suggest not doing this at all. I mean, it looks cheesy on a map. It's like, wow, this thing is a streetcar? Cool, it's a little circulator that I can just walk. A streetcar line should be a line, not a loop, a line. It should maybe be on 1 or 2 streets, whatever, but it should be a streetcar line, just like any other train line. Imagine if Amtrak or some major freight company was running a line in some circulator way. That would just be ridiculous. And I find that's kind of the same here, too. To be taken the most seriously, I would definitely recommend avoiding circulators. It just feels like a more substantial system when it's not that way. And I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself here, but I don't think they're totally useless. I think if you use it very, very sparingly, it can be useful if you have a downtown shuttle loop thing that only runs on weekdays and is just kind of extra service that just operates a loop service. I think in rare cases that can be okay, but again, I would highly, highly, highly suggest building 10 streetcar lines before you build 1 circulator loop thing. That was a big one for me. The rest of these are more minor. Number 2, be focused. Don't try and create one long line or loop or whatever to try and serve as much as you possibly can and go down a million different streets. I'm looking at you, Oklahoma City. That's just way too confusing. Oh, I want to get over here. Well, first I have to go down here, then over, then over, then over, then over, then over, then over. Yeah, no. Why? If you want to do stuff like that and serve multiple destinations, establish a grid of streetcar lines that take you to those destinations. It eases confusion. You can just look at the grid on a map and say, I want to go from over here to up here. I know that I'll take the streetcar over there and take another one up. Like I mentioned, I would just stick to 1, maybe 2 streets and have most of the route travel there. There's no need to add confusion. If you want to serve more than that, then create a new line, north or south, or whatever you want to do, to have the system all interconnected on separate lines. Number 3, new line possibilities and extensions. Basically, make it easy to extend your streetcar line or expand the network. If you have a circulator type system, that's going to be a lot more difficult to extend from there. I suppose not necessarily, just keep the turnaround track to go from one street to the other. But yeah, Also, if you have a junction, or you could make a junction, where if you have streetcar tracks going this way and you want a north-south route, you should be able to put a north-south route there and connect the tracks onto the existing system. That way streetcars can use all portions of it. Basically, make it so that you can expand your streetcar system as a streetcar network. Think of it as a network of lines. That's what you want to be creating. These next two are fairly closely related, but it kind of just boils down to don't make it a bus on rails. Number 4, avoid serving the curb. Once again, this is a streetcar, not a bus. If you're serving the curb lane, you may as well just have a bus going down and serving the curb. There should be a platform that passengers can go to and wait at. And the tracks should be in the middle of the street, not on the slow curb lanes. Placing the tracks in the middle of the street visually, I think, looks better. It allows you to keep on-street parking, if that's your concern, and allows you to possibly add bike lanes to this road in the future without having to worry about a streetcar being really close to the edge of the street. It also makes it much easier, if your whole system is like that, to make a turn from one set of tracks to another set of tracks. Sometimes if you're going from one curb lane streetcar to another curb lane streetcar, you have to build the corner way out, exaggerated around the corner. You wouldn't have to do that with tracks only down the middle. You just connect to the tracks. Number 5, get vehicles that are useful. Again, you can thank Portland for this, but we have 66-foot-long Skoda vehicles and Inacon streetcars and United streetcars, and all of our vehicles are around this 66 feet long. And a lot of other cities have done the same. But why is that? Well, at the time, Portland was the first to do this whole modern streetcar system, and nobody in the US was really doing that yet, building modern streetcar vehicles, because there was no market for it yet. So Portland went and picked a 66-foot-long streetcar vehicle and said, we want to do the system on these. And then the rest of the country followed in doing the same thing. Guys, did you forget that we already have 60-foot buses? We have 60-foot articulated buses, which have more seats and can carry more riders than these streetcars. Kind of makes you wonder why it's not a 60-foot bus line. We really should be looking into longer trains. Toronto successfully upgraded their old streetcars into much longer ones. And they did this recently, just a few years ago. Now they look really long, but really they're only about 85 to 90 feet long. The length of a standard light rail vehicle that, for example, Siemens makes in California. I think they look really long just because they're in 5 segments. And the reason for those extra segments is so that it makes it easier for the streetcars to turn the tighter corners. There's other reasons too, but that's why they're designed like that, and they're not just standard Siemens S700 trains or whatever. I would suggest using those. Toronto's are they used to be Bombardier, but RIP, and Alstom has since took them over, so now it's the Alstom Flexity Outlook. Those are the streetcars. The Outlook is this particular model from the Flexity line. There is a streetcar for the North American market called the Flexity Freedom, but it's only got 3 sections for the train. I would really like to see a North American version of this that has 5 segments. Same length, but 5 segments so that it can turn the tighter corners. Or, if Siemens Mobility designed the same thing as their normal S700, but made them into 5-segment trains instead of 3-segment trains, again allowing the tighter corners. That way, existing US streetcar systems that have these short vehicles and want to expand to larger vehicles can do so easily from a well-trusted and well-known manufacturer in California. Number 6, high frequency. This is a no-brainer if you want people to use your system. strive for 10 minutes or better. If you are a modern streetcar system and you're not running at 10 minutes or better, now you know what to work on. If you look at basically all of the first generation streetcar systems, they all run at 10 minutes or better at some point of the day. Toronto runs all 9 of their streetcar lines at 10 minutes or better. And I'll link this down below, but their line 504, King, during the busiest parts of the day, runs streetcars every 3 to 4 minutes. The general idea is, if you walk onto a street with streetcar tracks on it, ideally you wouldn't have to wait long at all before you see them. And in the best case scenario, you could look down the street in both directions and see streetcars on the street. Number 7, non-revenue tracks. Now this might seem pointless, but trust me, it's not. Now if you look at Toronto, again, or Philadelphia, you'll notice lots of tracks that are just not normally used, but connect parts of the alignment together. This is very important in case some sort of closure happens. If you're going to be designing Portlands, you're going to want some way to probably turn streetcars around by the Willamette River in case a bridge is open or lifted or whatever. There are other reasons, of course. If there's track work going on, or if the road is closed, or if it floods, or for any sort of reason, if there's a parade or whatever, and you don't want to use that streetcar route, but instead want to route it some other way, it's nice to be able to reroute streetcars and turn them around, even if you only have to route it that way twice a year. And on that same token, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, junctions where a streetcar line crosses another streetcar line or whatever should have extra unused turnoff points from the junction onto the other track. Again, even if you never use it, what if some detour happens and now it would be convenient to use it? You never know, and it's nice to have backup options. Number 8, avoid one-ways. Yeah, I know, easier said than done here in the US, but still. But if you must do a one-way couplet, do it like this. The streetcar should drop passengers off on the same city block as streetcars going in the other direction. That sounded confusing. Well, the Max in downtown Portland behaves a lot like a streetcar, and on Yamhill and Morrison Streets, as well as 5th and 6th Avenues, they run the Max on one-way streets. And they do what I'm talking about here. And you can kind of tell at the Pioneer Square Max station. We serve the same city block. You board the same city block, it's just across one side or the other of it. That way you're not boarding on one street and having to walk a mile to get on the streetcar in the other direction. It's just in the same city block, just on the other side. That sounded confusing too. And for God's sake, do not use a two-way street as a one-way streetcar route to make your circulator. If you have a two-way street, use it as a two-way street. Put the tracks in both directions. Don't just put a track in one direction and then use another two-way street as the track in the other direction. That makes no sense at all. Those should be two separate lines of two-way tracks. Don't treat two-ways as one-ways and make them circulators, Oklahoma City and Atlanta and probably others. Number 9, build yards for expansion. Your yard, garage, car barn, shop, whatever you call it, should be built not just for today, but for the future. When your line first opens, it should be way oversized with lots of empty tracks and lots of room for expansion. Remember, high frequency is important, which means you're going to need a lot of streetcars. So even if you just want to simply open it and then increase frequency later, you're going to need more vehicles in the same amount of space. Number 10, serve transit centers and major hubs. Okay, to be fair, lots of these modern streetcar systems serve that particular city's Union Station or Amtrak station or whatever, so already many major systems are already doing this. If you have a transit center or a bus terminal or whatever in downtown, it'd be a good idea to serve that too. Basically, give your people in your city a reason to use the system. Applause to Charlotte, North Carolina, because they already basically do this. In fact, this is definitely one of the better designed streetcar networks, and it's a modern streetcar system. So, good on them. Toronto, yes, I'm bringing them up again, has their streetcars serving bus loops and subway stations directly. They'll have the streetcar tracks going down the street, and then it'll take a detour and loop around a subway station, and that's it. That's where it ends. Right at the subway station building entrance. It goes around the building. It's pretty cool. Oh yeah, Toronto also has underground streetcar stops that connect with the subway. Literally, in the case of the Spadina station, if you get off the streetcar there, it is an escalator ride away to the subway platforms. That is integration. Number 11. Mixed traffic is okay, but strive for dedicated right-of-ways. Dedicated right-of-way is magical. It can speed up your travel time a lot. It also reduces the chances of idiots getting in your way by driving on the tracks and just doing illegal things. I understand that it can be difficult to design this way, especially in a city that's already built up and established. It's not like you can rebuild the roads when there's big old high-rises in the way. But take a look at Salt Lake City's S-Line streetcar. It's almost entirely its own dedicated right-of-way, and this system opened about a decade ago. A dedicated right-of-way can be as simple as placing the tracks in the median of a street and not allowing cars to drive in that median by putting a little curb or something to separate the road from the tracks. Want an example? Toronto, the 512 St. Clair streetcar runs in its own dedicated right-of-way, as well as a couple of other lines, the whole way. And it seems to work just fine. What's weird is many light rail systems across the US already do this pretty well. And in fact, here's a local example. I'll link these below, but there's a couple of examples locally. The yellow line on Interstate Avenue looks like a streetcar network. It looks like a streetcar line. As well as the blue line on Burnside Street, although that looks a bit more light railish. Sometimes the lines get kind of blurred between light rail and streetcar, and the MAX in Portland is absolutely no exception to that, but that is how you should ideally design the streetcar line, if possible. Also, dedicated traffic signals and traffic signal priority can dramatically help speed up your line. Many bus rapid transit, BRT lines do this, and it works. Number 12, platforms. The location of the platforms as well as the stop spacing. Ideally, you would have side platforms, and the platforms would be after the intersection that you serve, in both directions. This makes it easier to skip the stop in case nobody requests for it. In a two-way street, platforms should be offset like this. This is a local example on the MAX system. Sometimes it makes sense to use island platforms, where the tracks are a little further apart and you have a median between the two tracks, and then where that median is, you can say, oh, I want to put a platform here. Let's cut the median here and put a platform there instead, so streetcars can serve it. An example, a local example of this would be Harrison Street in downtown Portland, right at PSU. Stop spacing should be further than a bus. That way the system feels like it's going faster. If you're serving every 2 city blocks on a streetcar, that's probably too close. I would recommend bare minimum the stops should be 3 blocks apart or 4 blocks apart or further. I like to think of it as the in-between of a bus and a light rail system, so that's why. Last comment I'll make on platforms, and it has to deal with the curb platforms and why I think that was an attractive option 2 decades ago and why some people are still using it, is because of the added accessibility. If you're in a wheelchair and you're just waiting there, you can just easily roll onto a streetcar. But at the same time, you're already kind of going across town. I don't think it's that difficult to cross half a crosswalk to get to the middle of the street and board from a platform in there. That just doesn't seem like extra effort to me. And wheelchairs can easily go across the crosswalk and onto the platform into the train. I think that was the appeal of the curb platforms, is not having to do that, but I don't really see that causing too many issues. So now here's a slimmed down list of what the 12 elements are. I'll also put this list in the description. Alright, well, join me next time where we will do the 4th and final part of this video, and we will look at what's wrong with the existing systems and how to fix them.